It has come to my attention that many of you don't know the difference between Hertz and FPS, so I'm going to explain it to you. And if it happens to be of any use to you, remember to leave this video a like and just subscribe to the channel. It's the least I could ask for, except, maybe like $1 million or like eternal youth or something like that. Now let me use the KISS method to explain what I'm getting into. FPS is how many frames per second your computer can generate for the screen. And a frame is a full screen representation of whatever data is coming from the computer. This could be images, words, your browser, the video that you're literally watching right now is coming to you one frame at a time, but so fast that you really can't notice it. And Hertz is how many times your monitor can refresh the info generated on screen, which is also known as the refresh rate. So I'm going to be using Hertz and refresh rate interchangeably throughout the course of this video, so keep that in mind. So to get a little bit more into it, let's say that you had a computer that was generating 60 frames per second. That would basically mean that every 16.7 milliseconds, there's one still image sent to the computer. And if you had a monitor that ran at 60 Hertz, then that means every 16.7 milliseconds, that monitor would be able to refresh the screen and show you the data that got sent over. But what if there's an imbalance? And this is a great question to ask because a lot of people's PC systems have a little bit of an imbalance. So let's get into it. Let's say that your computer's FPS was lower than your monitor's refresh rate. What would happen? Let's say that you had a 60 FPS computer and a 120 Hertz monitor. Really nothing would happen because what's going on is that one frame got sent to the monitor and so the monitor refreshed it. But since that monitor refreshes twice as fast as the computer can generate the frames, all that's going to happen is that before a next frame is sent, the monitor is going to refresh again, then another frame is going to come in, the monitor will refresh, then refresh, then another frame is going to come in. So all you do is get the same frame twice, which doesn't negatively impact your performance at all. In fact, it leaves a lot of room to grow. Just boost your FPS and you'll be doing better business. But now, what if the FPS was higher than the refresh rate? This is where things get a little tricky because naturally, FPS isn't one solid rate the entire time, especially when you're playing video games. Sometimes your frame rate could drop to 90, another time the frame rate could go as high as even 1,000 depending on the video games that you're playing, whereas your monitor can still only have like a 60 Hertz, 120 Hertz, 240 Hertz refresh rate. So here's what tends to happen if your FPS is much faster than the monitor that you got. You'll get this thing called screen tearing. And basically screen tearing occurs because as the monitor is refreshing, a new frame is being sent. So midway through that refresh, a new frame is coming in, and so then the monitor has to deal with the old frame and the new frame. And then that's when you get a little bit of screen tearing. Now you can easily minimize screen tearing by using features that a lot of modern monitors come with. These features are called V-Sync, Adaptive Sync, Enhanced Sync, all different types of things. And then when you turn these features on, it'll pretty much eradicate any type of screen tearing because what they do is that they cap out the frames per second so that your frame rate is never outdoing your monitor's refresh rate, thus leading to a much smoother experience. There's many more things that can be said about screen tearing, but like I said, I'm really trying to keep it simple, stupid, so we're not going to get too much into it, but that is basically the gist. I did leave an article down below for you to read a little bit more deeper into this and what happens with screen tearing. Now, I'm sure some of you might have a couple questions, things like, which one is more important, FPS or Hertz? Well, that's a little tricky. So to explain this, remember, FPS is how much data the computer can generate for the screen. So if you had a high FPS computer, that means that your overall input lag would be lower because the more signals that you can send to the computer, the more that computer can receive those signals and then send it to the monitor. And now if you have a high refresh monitor, your monitor can keep up with as many signals as the computer is getting. But let's say that your computer doesn't have a high FPS rate. What's the beauty of having a high refresh monitor? Well, the monitor is really only as good as the computer is getting its frames from. You see, you can have a 240 Hertz monitor, but if your computer only does 60 to 100 frames, right? Then what was the point? You're not going to get the benefits of having such a high refresh rate monitor because there's nothing for the monitor to refresh. It's looking at the same stuff over and over again before it ever gets a new frame. So remember that it is kind of more important to have a higher FPS computer than it is to have a high refresh rate monitor. But if you do have a high FPS computer, go and get yourself a fast monitor so that you can enjoy the full power of what that computer is delivering. Hold on now. Before you run to Best Buy or Micro Center and try to get the highest refresh rate monitor along with upgrading your PC all the way to however many FPS you want, understand this. The human eye can only perceive 60 frames per second. Some humans can perceive a little bit more, and obviously some can perceive a little less. But the human eye is pretty much capped at 60 frames per second. So if you go and upgrade your PC and your monitors to 240 Hz monitors and 240 FPS and all these different things, yes, you will be increasing the overall smoothness and look of your computer and your gaming experience, but unless you're like a high tier competitive multiplayer gamer, you can pretty much just chill out for a little bit because the difference is not going to be so high that you're going to turn into Shroud or Ninja. That still takes a lot of work that really no amount of PC upgrading or monitor upgrading is going to get you there. You gotta put in the hard time as well. Unless of course you just want the beauty of playing at a very high refresh rate, then by all means go and do what you want to do. It's your money after all, or at least I hope it is. Now, why is any of this important? Well, next gen consoles are about to start having 120 FPS games come out more and more consistently, thus making the usual bench rate of 60 FPS kind of outdated. And you don't want to be the guy who's not getting the smoothest FPS and the smoothest refresh rate possible, because especially in multiplayer games, you will be at a slight disadvantage. And even though it's slight, it could definitely make the difference between you being the best player in your town or, you know, just another average Joe with a hobby. Plus, I know that I said that the human eye is really capped at 60 frames per second, but that does not mean that you couldn't still see the difference at 120 frames per second. After 120 frames per second, many say that your mind it couldn't see any type of difference. But at 120 frames per second, your mind, your eyes can still kind of see how much smoother things are moving. And so if you do go out and get yourself a 120 Hz monitor, it is going to be nice for your PC and it's going to be nice for your console, and it just overall future proofs you. So that's pretty good. That's all I gotta say about this. Chukavelli was in, Chukavelli is out. I'm happy that you came and enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe. It does me a lot. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace, man.